That's right.
Good
Awesome.
morning.
Hello, Bits. Hello, Fager. And Linda. Yay.
Hello, Linda.
Who are you missing with it? I think it's one more.
Um,
Let me just check
yeah.
here. Mm, but nevertheless, guys, welcome. Like I told Lizette yesterday, the second last workshop of the year for us. Yeah, I'm really excited. I mean, I think this webinar is coming just at the right time. It seems
Mm.
the world is quite traumatic at the moment. Lots of trauma flying around. So, the only way to really um, not be traumatized is to not read the news. So it is a pretty rough situation in the world. But yeah, then we have weekends like this where we can get to a place where we can reevaluate. And yeah, I always love this workshop because it 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 does give you the tools to deal with trauma and even feeling a bit more empowered to do that makes you feel better about things. So looking forward to it, and I hope you guys are as well. Lizette, you are um, your job this weekend is to take all our trauma away. So,
uh, sorry man. Ek praat gaan met Chandra. Sy is op haar
is that right?
summerconference. She will be with us about 10 o'clock.
Okay,
And
great.
so I just confirmed with her and so on. So welcome. Yes, we're going to talk about trauma and all the challenges regarding trauma and things like that. But I think before we do that, Jack, let us first just start and ask everybody how they are. How has the year been for you so far? Um, do you have, yeah, just talk a little bit to us about what happened to you since we saw you last. It's been quite a while. So, Jack, maybe you can just let people go down the list as you see this.
Ursula, let me pick on you first. How are you doing? You're muted, so that's a problem.
There. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, well, good morning, everyone. Yeah. Well, it's been a busy year. It's been a little bit of a hectic year and a little bit traumatic as well, dealing with a lot of life issues. So it hasn't been exactly smooth going. So yeah, so there are challenges, lots of challenges. I have a son who's battling an addiction, and he's just 20. So it's a really, can I say, a new road we're traveling on?
Mm.
Some we've never been there before, and it's been back and forth. Um, and in and all that, we're planning a move out of Pietermaritzburg. So by the end of the year, so it's lots of change.
Mm.
But there have been some good bits as well. I've got a boy in matric who's steaming ahead, and we had his matric dance, and that was really lovely, And I've got my older daughter. She's also busy with her masters this year, so that's been an exciting journey with her, and there have been highlights and good points, but there's also been the low points. But I think just having some focus in that there is an end, and that God knows the end from the beginning, and that He gives us the grace to deal with the situations, and He also gives us vision for the future. For me, that has been a great help and a great source of strength. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's it for me right
Thank
now.
you. Thank you, Ursula. And please let me know the name of your son and we will pray for him, for him.
Thank you. Yeah.
there's also, if you I must just find it. There is a wonderful Facebook support group for parents
Oh,
of children that are caught in addiction, and it's real life.
yeah.
It's not flowery.
Mhm.
It's real stuff where you can. It's a closed group, so it's not an open group. But I will see if I can find the link, and then you can join as well, because it
Oh,
helps. You know, just
yeah.
the feeling that there's somebody else. You're not
Yes.
alone. That makes a huge difference, because it's a long road,
Yes. Yeah.
and there are more potholes than smooth stretches in that road.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
definitely send me his name on WhatsApp, and I will start praying for him. And because that prayer is a parent's
Yes.
greatest weapon in times like this. Eh?
Thank you, Lizette. Appreciate that.
Okay.
Will do. Yeah.
Suzanne.
Hallo, so wat 'n jaar, wat 'n rowwe jaar, is al wat ek kan sê. Dit was 'n rowwe jaar, maar die positief is ook daar. Ek het die derde keer ouma geraak. Ja, so dit is die blessing in alles, sien ons, die positiewe. So verder, dit baie dae gevoel, jy weet, soos daai wasgoed in 'n wasmasjien wat net nie omknoopbaar raak nie. Ja, so dit was so 'n jaar.
Sure, yeah, Nia, I think all of us can agree that if we look back, this year was challenging, but it was extremely quickly again. It's like time is speeding up, like soos die tuimeldroër of die wasmasjien. Dit is 'n uitdaging, maar baie geluk met ouma word weer. En ja, mag ons die jaar rustiger afsluit as hoe die jaar was.
Yep.
Fabi, hoe gaan dit?
Morning, everyone. Yes, it's been a challenging year. My husband and I celebrate our first wedding anniversary on Sunday, but we've had quite the challenge. For 4 months of our first year, we had my parents living with us due to my dad kind of losing. Well, I wouldn't say he lost his job, but he had a job offer somewhere in Africa, and it turned out that it just never actually happened. So they were waiting and waiting, and promises were made, and nothing happened. So that took 4 months. So that was a challenge, being newly married and having your parents live with you and your husband. But in the process, my husband got to know my parents better. So we're trying to look at the positives, because they were living out of town as well. So we didn't see them very often. So that was a plus point. And then also we found out that I'm pregnant. So we're on that journey at the moment. So I think the year just has been a lot more different than what we expected. You know, being newly married, you think this is how the year is going to go. This is what you're going to do. This is what you're planning. And then life happens, and nothing what you planned happens. But in the end, we feel blessed, and we're on the journey, and it's made a bit of a few other complications. But at the end of the day, we just put it forth. But we feel blessed, and yeah, it's a new challenge and a new journey. But we're trying to look at the positives. My dad got other work, and they're now living 40 minutes away, where they would have lived days away in another country. So especially with the news of being pregnant as well and having them close, that is a blessing. So we're just counting our blessings.
Fantastic. Congratulations. May it be a blessed and a quieter time for you guys, because you have to get the energy up when baby is born. It's going to be less of a quiet time, but yeah, it's great that everything worked out for the good. So I'm really, really blessed about that. Thanks a lot. Linda.
Ek wil net dat julle my dan hoor. Goeiemôre aan elkeen. Ek kan nie dink is weer 'n jaar wat ons nou verby is. Dit het net vir my verskriklik vinnig gegaan. Was regtig, kan ek nou saam met die ander stemme, 'n geweldige uitdagende jaar. En ek moes baie keer gaan sit en dink, maar wat is hier nou aan die gebeur? Bewustelike besluite neem om op koers te bly. En die uitdagings het regtig van kante gekom wat ek dit nie verwag het nie. En spesifiek op verhoudings, ek kom daai ding kan ek nou nog nie verstaan nie, wat verhoudings is vir my verskriklik belangrik en dis iets wat ek koester en ek het sulke aanslae op verhoudings gehad hierdie jaar wat vir my net vreemd was en wat ek mee moes deel en gaan sit en besluit, maar wat is die regte keuse vir my en op hierdie stadium wat ek is. En ek het eintlik maar in hierdie jaar geleer om regtig nie die Here te vertrou vir dag vir dag, want as dit bietjie vooruit gewerk het ek in die moeilikheid gekom. So as dit nou groot ding is wat ek geleer het, dan is dit om regtig op God te fokus, letterlik vir die kleinste goedjies afhanklik van hom te wees, want dit het baie keer regtig met my baie rof gegaan en dan dink ek, is dit die moeite werd? Moet ek op hierdie pad voortgaan? En ek dink spesifiek aan die studies, dan weet ek net waarvoor God my geroep het. Maar in die algemeen gaan dit goed, ek is gesond, ek is geseënd en ek is ontsettend dankbaar dat ek hier kan sit vandag.
Dankie
Baie
daarvoor, Linda. Ja, nee, kyk, ek dink dis een ding wat 'n mens kan saamstem, soos ek vroeër gesê het. Dit voel net regtig asof elke jaar vinniger en vinniger gaan. En ek hou van die feit dat jy doelbewustelik besluit in plaas van gebaseer op hoe 'n mens voel en wat 'n mens sien om jou, want dit is op die oomblik 'n bietjie van 'n malhuis en ons het nodig om net stil te word en tyd uit te sit om net weer te besef, okay, ons is nie van hierdie wêreld nie. Ek wil nie van hierdie wêreld wees nie. Dit is regtig 'n uitdaging, maar baie dankie dat jy hier is. Dit wys jou besluit is besig om af te speel in jou oë. So dit is werklik 'n blessing. Bets, hoe gaan dit met jou?
Dit gaan baie goed, dankie. Weet jy, ek wil so graag hierdie skrif met julle deel. Is dit reg so? Dis in Psalm.
Asseblief. Ja.
Dis wat die Here vanoggend op my hart gesit het. Dit sê, blessed be the Lord because he has heard the voice of my supplications. The Lord is my strength and my shield, and my heart trusted in him. And I am helped. Therefore my heart greatly rejoices, and with my song I will praise him. Nou, hoekom ek dit lees is, ek dink ons almal het uitdagings, en ek het ook uitdagings tot dusver. Ek moet aansluit by Linda, ek dink baie uitdagings gaan oor verhoudings, en hoe ek het gesien het is, ek sou sê, hoe nader mens, hoe meer mens in die woord delf, en hoe meer mens geestelik groei, is dit asof die vyand kom en hy werk op die mees onaardigste maniere, en dis maar meestal in verhoudings, voel ek op die oomblik. Of dit nou in jou huwelik is, dat daar die snaakse goeders uitkom, waar 'n mens miskien goed oor die weg gekom het met sekere persone, en as dit net 'n bietjie meer uitdagings, maar ek voel regtig asof die vyand werk hoe sterker ons groei. Maar ek wil net met julle deel, daar's baie blessings op my pad. My familie gaan dit goed. Ek het 3 seuns en hulle doen baie goed op universiteit en so ek kan niks daaroor kla nie en ek wil maar net dis baie nice om dit met julle te deel want selfs die trauma kontaksessie, dit was my so amazing om dit alles om Lizette se video klips te luister, want dit het my so baie gehelp, en Jack weet, ek werk op die plaas, met die plaasmense, en daar was 'n geval byvoorbeeld van iemand wat al been verloor het, en ek het net soveel geestelike input gekry deur daai video's, weet jy, dit was net vir my absolute klips wat ek geluister het, en ek wil net met julle deel dat die woord van God en Jesus se teachings het my nou net gelei deur al hierdie opdraandes waardeur ek soms gaan. My grootste uitdaging is finansiëel. Maar die Here het ook gewys dat daar sekere goed is wat jy regtig baie nodig het, nê? En ja, dit is net die Here se wonderlike Heilige Gees wat vir jou lei en ek dink as mens net dit het nie, dan sou ek nie geweet het om oor al hierdie hekkies te kom nie. So, dis lekker om net weer vir julle te sien en dis baie lekker om dit alles met julle te deel. En ek is net dankbaar ons het 'n woord en ons het leiding van die Heilige Gees. En dit is my storie.
Amen, Bates. Bye, dankie. Yes, yeah, that verse is that the correct one? Psalm 28 verse 7.
O, ekskuus tog, ek het nooit gesê waar dit is nie.
Yeah, I think it's the Lord is my
Jammer.
strength and my shield. In Him my
Jammer.
heart trusts.
Ja, dis
Okay.
Psalm 28 vers 6.
6, okay. Die Engels is 7.
Ja, in my Bybel dit is.
Ja. 6 en 7, great. Yeah, 6 in my translation here, it says, "Blessed be the Lord, for He has heard the voice of my pleas for mercy." And, that is so powerful. I realize that our lives on this earth will always include trauma. We cannot escape it. We cannot wish it away. We cannot think of it as less of what it is. I think to a great extent, we do that. We minimalize the impact of stress and trauma. If we would say trauma, I think of a motor car accident. I think of war. The Israel-Palestine war at the moment. It's really traumatic. So you think of really major things when it comes to trauma, but have you considered everyday life as being traumatic? Being stuck in the car in traffic can be traumatic. So it's not necessarily major things that are traumatic. It is so part of our lives. When our defense mechanisms and our stress resistance crumbles, trauma is right at the door. And it is a disruptive force that takes normality or balance or our everyday lives captive. And many of us don't realize what kind of a crisis and challenge it can be. And we think we can just gloss it over and just, be a strong Christian and have a strong faith, and we will escape trauma. But unfortunately, that is not the case. Unfortunately, we have to be very wary of this force in the world today and the effect that it has on our lives. Trauma, in a sense, and that's it. I'm blabbering on, but I'm just trying to say how critical the understanding of trauma is that we realize, being an everyday occurrence, we also realize that if we look to the crucifixion of Jesus, if we look to the climax of his life on earth, we see that the climax of his life wasn't the cross. The climax of his life was the resurrection. And many times we think, oh, the cross was the ultimate sign of trauma. And yes, it was. I think it definitely puts everything into perspective. But there's a story after trauma. There's a story after the cross, which is much more powerful than the cross. And that's the resurrection. So every trauma crisis and every trauma challenge has resurrection following it. And it looks different than the previous normal, but it is, it's a reconstruction of what could have been a lifelong struggle.
I think, Jack,
Is it?
that just to add to what you're saying, we have a choice, because trauma will forever change you. forever. So we literally have a choice, and I like the explanation that you use about the trauma of the cross of Christ, because we have a choice. We can either stay at the cross, just stay there, keep remembering the pain and the trauma and staying at the cross, or we are willing to journey from the cross through the grave to the new day. But that is a journey. So in every client in front of you, because trauma will always shape you, you will always look different after trauma. But the choice whether we're going to, how the trauma is going to shape us is ours. And this is actually why it is a challenge. How are we going to respond to the trauma in front that we are going through and that is in front of us? So I think that is something that is we need to just work through and discuss. So what I'm going to do in this next 2 days, and we're a very small group, so we have the opportunity to actually just discuss certain things and talk about it, and about trauma, is trauma counseling. Now, this is actually a wrong concept, because we don't talk about trauma counseling anymore, or we should not talk about trauma counseling. But for us to understand what we're going to do, we talk about, we're going to look at trauma in a counseling setting. But we normally talk about the word debriefing or normalizing. And I want you to add to the word trauma, critical incident, because I think that's very important. We have started to use the word trauma for many things. Faggy, for instance, it was stressful for your parents to live with you for 4 months, but is it the same as traumatic? But we use the word and say, you know what, the trauma of my parents living with us when my dad was jobless or whatever, we use it like that. And we don't always use it in the correct phrase. It doesn't mean it wasn't stressful, it doesn't mean it wasn't difficult. But it means that we need to reframe what we're talking about. Critical incident is the word I want us to look at when we talk about how we're going to do trauma counseling. And again, we've got a helping process that is going to be our guide. So the first thing we're going to say is, we never do anything without the partnership of the Holy Spirit. And Jack, if I can just say something here, and I want you guys to write this down. Where the Holy Spirit is present, there's order and calmness, not chaos. When people are recovering from a traumatic incident, they experience so much chaos that we must not further traumatize by all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff that we see that's now taking the internet by storm. We keep it calm and in a sense of control. The establishment of empathy. I want you guys to write this down, because that establishment of empathy is going to cost you something. Every single one of you sitting in front of me have had a traumatic event that has happened to you. An event that has disrupted you. Ursula, you sharing about your son's addiction. You're going to have many traumatic events in the future still to come, as he is in recovery. Some of the stuff is just so traumatic for us. And when we engage with a client who's going to talk about their trauma, the only way you're going to feel empathy is when you recall your own traumatic experiences. So you have to be aware, and this is important for me, of what is happening for you during the debriefing process. Trauma is difficult. It's emotional. It is exhausting. You can't do 10 trauma debriefings in a row. Well, maybe you can, but I don't advise it, because trauma in itself is a long process. And in listening skills, we have spoken so many times about listening. The question you have to listen, and we're going to talk about what you have to listen to many times. One of the key things we have to listen to is the changes in posture, the changes in tone, the changes in rhythm of speaking. Are they speaking quicker, slower, deliberative? Are they swearing? What are you observing with your eyes? Because listening, guys, is not an ear activity. It's a whole body exercise. It's not just, it's the input is through the ears. That's your input point, but the rest is used with you have to listen with everything inside of you. I'm going to play us a video clip this morning about an event that has just happened now on the 10th or the 11th of October in Israel. And it's the story of a father who has lost his 8-year-old daughter. It's the next day that the interview is. So I want you to listen carefully to the father, observe what he is saying. It is upsetting. I'm telling you guys now, it's upsetting. I've watched it many times and it keeps upsetting me. It's about 5 minutes long, less than 5 minutes actually. And then there is a clip that I will put in the group that I want you guys to watch at some point in time about what has happened in Israel. It's a very good clip so that we have a good understanding of what is happening. So please observe what has happened here. Will you guys let me know if you can hear? Oopsie.
They just said, we found Emily. She's dead. And I went, yes! I went, yes, and smiled. Because that is the best news of the possibilities that I knew. That was the best possibility that I was hoping for. She was either dead or in Gaza. And if you know anything about what they do to people in Gaza, that is worse than death. That is worse than death. The way they treat you. They'd have no food, they'd have no water. She'd be in a dark room filled with Christ knows how many people and terrified every minute, hour, day, and possible years to come. So death was a blessing, an absolute blessing.
Sure. You guys can switch on your videos and talk to me. What did you hear in this? What did you see? What did you hear in this clip? What did you notice?
It's quite shocking that his reaction. That I think that kind of upset me that he said yes. He was glad that she died. I don't know what it's like to be in Palestine or Gaza. So he probably has a much different experience of that. But to me, that's kind of like the wrong answer. I would have still hoped that she would have been alive so I could have gone and rescued her or something like that. So that's something that was quite upsetting to me.
I actually watched that last night, and I was thinking, with his understanding of what happens in Gaza, and as a parent, I know me. My daughter's 22. She goes onto campus, and I say, message me. I said, send me random messages, so I just know you're okay, And to think your child is in that position, while it seems selfish and it seems, but you know what? As a parent, you become helpless. And it's difficult, I think, to dredge up hope. We do have hope, but if you don't have Christ as well, then death is the better option. So I can identify, I can understand his choice. Maybe not 100% agree with it, but I understand. Yeah.
I think for me was what immediately came up to me was, that's unconditional love. That's you would rather have her in heaven, which is the best place, than being on earth and having her, whatever is done to her. So the freedom, even though his heart breaks, the freedom of knowing that she's where we're all supposed to be.
Okay.
Alhoewel ons seker nie is, kan julle my hoor of sien?
Ons kan jou mooi hoor, Linda, dankie.
Alhoewel ons nie 'n idee het wat hy seker op hierdie stadium deurgaan nie, maar die trauma dink ek om nie te weet waar is jou kind, lewe sy of is hy dood nie. Dink ek daai dag en nag nie slaap nie, wonder wat gebeur met haar, is 'n lang uitmergelende proses en om jou ten minste jou kind se liggaam te hê en seker te wees. Ja, sy is dood. Ons kan haar begrawe. Kan jy sekerlik op 'n stadium vrede kry, maar om nie te weet nie, dink ek, besef hy en hy verstaan ook die wreedheid van Hamas. So dis vir hom, al is dit teenstrydig met wat 'n pa en 'n ma se hart voel, jy wil jou kind terug hê, het hy op daai oomblik besef, maar dis dalk die beste dat hy ten minste haar liggaam het.
So, Bets?
Weet jy, ek stem bietjie meer saam met Jack. Dit was my nogal baie, dit wat hy gesê het was my, wat sal die woord wees, negatief of destructive, of ek het nie 'n baie goeie, ek weet nie wat die woord is nie, maar dit was nie vir my, dit was vir my nie 'n goeie ding om dit te hoor nie, want dit wil voorkom asof hy gaan natuurlijk deur baie dinge, maar dit wil voorkom asof hy heeltemal confused is. Sy reaksie is maar soos impulsief. Elkeen hanteer natuurlijk trauma anders, veral as jy nou daai veg en vlug en daai reaksies kyk. Ek dink persoonlik hy praat, hy operate nie uit 'n Holy Spirit ek weet nou nie om dit te sê nie, maar ek dink hy hy's confused en hy miskien is dit maar net sy eerste reaksie.
Okay, Peggy?
I think for me, I obviously also don't know the situation, but I can just imagine that he's heard all the other stories about what has happened to other children and other people. So I think for him as well, it's more that thing of he's got some closure because he knows that she's no longer here. Where if she was still alive, like he said, who knows for how long it would have carried on. So I think for him as a father, what he's holding on to when he's saying that he's glad she's dead is that thing of he's got closure because he knows that she's not being harmed or she's not being hurt anymore.
I think I just want to
Yes.
make a comment there. He did not say she was glad she's dead. He was glad she was killed and not kidnapped. Eh?
Yeah.
We must
It's just
hear
better
that
than, yeah.
because she's 8 years old. They've raped a baby.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So this
it's
is the fear.
that is a
Mm.
different perspective that I also
Yeah.
want to agree with that if she was alive and in Hamas's capture or prison or that she probably would have been tortured and raped and you must remember there's this narrative going around that Islam is a religion of peace and it's not true. Islam hates the Jews. The Jews are dogs to them, Christians as well. So if you really look at the teachings of Islam, it's not a peaceful religion. So the reality is it would have been very, very, very treacherous to be caught by them.
Yeah, I think so. Here is what I want you guys to note. And thank you that we have different perspectives. First of all, I want to say thank you because when somebody tells you their trauma story, I don't know if you guys noticed, there were two people in the interview, the father and the interviewer. Did you notice that? Okay. Did she ever interrupt him or did she just listen? That interview is about 10 minutes long. The complete interview, that he was trapped, just to give you background, for 2 days, that he could not get out of his own house. So he did not know where his daughter was for 2 days. And when they found little Emily, because his worst fears probably was that she was in Hamas's hands. So take a note of the interviewer and how she just allowed the client to express, let's put it in our language, his experience. She did not correct him at any point. She allowed him, even though it's shocking for us. He said he laughed or smiled, probably, when he heard she was found dead. That is an abnormal reaction, but that trauma that they are going through is abnormal. Don't ever think, that's why I talk about trauma. It's not stress. It's a completely abnormal event that changes a person forever. And you're right. We're sitting here in the comfort of our own houses and we listen to this and we have our own viewpoints and judgments that happens when a person, he even swore on the clip. We must be careful that when we do trauma debriefing or critical incident debriefing, that we do not impose our own viewpoints. That's what I want to that's the problem with that. That's why I said empathetic listening means you have to be aware of what's happening for you in this moment, because this is a shocking event that shocks us when we listen to this. Jack, just to add to what Ursula and Linda have also said, there are other interviews of parents whose daughters have been lost. They are either kidnapped or they just have not been found after the mass attack. Those parents are devastated, frantic, and completely, they don't know what to do with their lives. They cannot function because they don't know where's their daughters. So we have this difficult situation, and I want you to, did you notice the man's pain as he was speaking? Could you feel his pain? With the tears were coming everywhere. He was fighting an invisible foe. Did you see his hands going like that, trying to ward off something? Did you notice that as he was sitting there? This is the thing, we have to start to listen. I told you guys, you have to listen and notice and observe. We get taken in by the words of the story. Did you notice that he was going like that? As though he was warding off thoughts that he did not want to have at that point in time. And the tears were just, he was wet with tears. His beard was wet with tears as he spoke there. So don't let us, this is a powerful clip about what's happening right now. It's not even a month old. This is the reality we experience in trauma debriefing. So if we go into Jack, if we can sort of like go to our little groups, maybe, or we can maybe do it, let's do a big group exercise. And I want to ask you guys a question from listening to the clip now, because Bets, you said something there. It was as though he was not in touch with the reality or the seriousness of the situation, and you are quite right. Through the next couple of months, he's going to have to work from trauma through grief, and we have to hope that he doesn't go into traumatic grief, because once you go into traumatic grief, the process takes a long time for you to walk out of traumatic grief. So in this process, how would you guys give us a definition of trauma counseling from what you've seen? What do you think is trauma counseling? How would you define it? Anyone, you can just chat or type for us. It's such a small group. Everybody is quiet.
I think the Afrikaans word always comes to mind, ontlonting. So I didn't notice the guy warding off this thing that was attacking him. So to me, trauma counseling is this thing of helping a person. It's like first aid in a sense. You're helping this person initially. You're like a emotional paramedic, for instance. So you help a person maybe a day or two after the trauma not to fall into a very destructive cycle, and help them, actually support them in carrying this weight, helping them ward off this thing that is trying to consume them, and help them with the initial integration of the trauma. It's not going to sort it out, but at least you are there to help them with a very, 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 very vulnerable state.
There's a recommendation that we need to do trauma debriefing as quick as possible. But Chandra and I spoke, I think it was on Monday, and the reality is people don't go for trauma debriefing immediately after such an incident. Sometimes it's many years later that they actually arrive for trauma debriefing. Right now in Israel, for example, there is no trauma debriefing people on the ground because they're literally surviving there's a completely different aspects. They're now in fight mode. And so you have this client who's caught up in a traumatic event from long ago that now was supposed to get debriefed then, that has never been able to get to that place. So that is also part of trauma counseling. And then it's more difficult to go through those first aid, as Jack is calling. But I like the word first, emotional first aid. I think that is a good good place, a good explanation of this. Okay. It's important, guys, that you listen to who's the victim in the story. Okay. The victim, in Afrikaans die slagoffer. The victim, who's the victim in this clip that you guys watched? Who will you say is the victim? You have to know who's the victim, otherwise you can't help anybody. So who's the victim? Suzanne.
I think the father is the victim.
Okay. Why?
Because he's the one that's experiencing. Hy ervaar die trauma en die seer en die pyn van die dogter. So hy's agtergelaat.
Yes. Okay. Ursula?
It is the father, I would think, because he's the one who's in that shell-shocked state of dealing with the consequences of what has happened. Yeah.
Jy sê wat van die res van die familie?
Ja, daar is secondary victims ook, slagoffers. There will always be secondary victims as well. So yes, definitely. Good point, good observation.
Why is the I'm going to ask a different question. So why is the daughter not the victim?
Who can answer? Anybody? Who wants to answer that?
My opinie, ek mag verkeerd wees, maar sy gaan nie deur die trauma nie, sy lewe nie meer.
Yeah, she's doing.
So die pa,
she's the victim of Hamas. She died,
yes.
But she's not the trauma victim.
She's the victim of what happened, but she's not
She's probably the cause of his trauma.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I also agree with Linda. There should be other family members that's also involved. They're not there on social media, but I'm sure. But what we can see now, it's definitely the father, because they don't show the others. But yeah.
Always remember who is sitting in front of you. We get confused about the victim, especially when it's somebody that have passed away, that has died due to a car accident or anything like that. And it's the father, mother, brother, sister, whoever sits in front of you. We call that the primary victim in this it's that primary victim that we're talking about. That's a client that's sitting in front of you. And the next, and then we get to the secondary victims. Let's say Emily's mom is in Ireland, so she wasn't there firsthand to experience it, but she has. She's also there. She's also part of it. Emily will have friends, brothers and sisters. One of the clips that just to explain this victims and how diverse is the victims. In one of the as the soldiers went through as the news media started to videotape the events that has happened. In one of the places they found the whole family was slaughtered, children, baby, 3-year-old, everybody was slaughtered. And the dog is obviously the little boy's dog, and he got onto his bed and he refuses to leave. He's going to die there, the dog. They have tried to get him out of there. He's refusing to leave. It's a German Shepherd. It looks like Chandra. And he's crawled into that, and they have, in the end, started to feed him on the bed. Because he's staying there. He's not moving away from that space. Victims is the client sitting in front of you. That's so important. There is so many victims out there, not just one type of victim. And we need to ask yourself, who's your client sitting in front of you? Do not get distracted by the other role players, but we need to identify who they are and what was their roles in there. Okay. The important thing is, and this I want to get back to Jack's original thing that he spoke about this morning, about the cross and the trauma of the cross and the empty grave and the resurrection, and those important concepts of this resurrection happening. We have to empower the client to move away from the trauma. The trauma will forever have shaped them. They will forever have impacted them, but we need to help the client to move away from getting stuck in that place. And Shaundrack will also tell you, if clients come to you years later and they come with a traumatic event that they have not worked through, they normally, their emotional growth is stunted by, or even spiritual growth, by that one traumatic event. Okay. So we need to empower them to be able to do that. The last question about the role of the counselor during trauma counseling, I'm not going to answer now. I'm going to leave it for tomorrow as our last big group conversation, that we can get to this point and ask ourselves, what is happening for me as the counselor in this place? So the first thing you need to note is, when we encounter trauma, our own faith, how we see life, how we see God, how we see the world will be challenged. So know this. Okay? And then know this too, it's not about you. We always say this beautiful little sentence, we're just a vessel for the Holy Spirit. So be the vessel. Don't you go step in there and say, I have to explain to them so that they can change and that they can understand what's actually happening. No. You need to know this is about the victim and not about you. So as we're going to go through the rest of our conversations and the model and so on, we're going to look at these different terms. So I want you to write down for me trauma or critical incident. I want you to always find who's the victim. And then what does the counselor do, their role. And the third thing that we need to talk about is, and it's not on here, is who's the offender. In the case of little Emily, who has passed away, soldiers have killed her. We assume she was shot. The detail have not been made known to us. That's our assumption. So who are the offender or offenders in this place?
Lizzie, sorry, can I ask something?
Yes, please.
Because there's not always an offender in the traumatic incidents.
Why?
If somebody, like with me, I had one passed away on natural causes, but it was traumatic, and I was there, and it was chaos. So there was no offender. He was killed by
Heart disease?
hy het 'n bloedklont deur die brein gekry. So
No, there's the offender. There's the offender. There's the event.
So,
That's the, yes.
so dis nie 'n persoon, hoef nie 'n persoon te wees nie.
We have to be
Dis 'n
careful.
event.
We have to be careful before I say that. In your unique case, yes, it can be the heart embolism that has gone through his brain or his heart that has caused his death. It happens quickly, and it's a traumatic event when you have lost him. But he was not a victim of a crime or another drunk driver that drove in front of him or anything like that. So the illness will become the offender in that case.
So the offender can be something abstract.
Yes, like cancer can be an offender or something like that. But at the same time, I'm saying this with caution. We have to, when we talk about the trauma debriefing, it's important to identify how that we don't now just go on to say for Emily's father, his name is Thomas, that we don't make Thomas, the offender was the person who killed his daughter, not the event of the day. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So again, there's not just a yes or not just a no. This is both sides of it. So it's a good question. Thank you so much. So we need to also try to identify those offenders that has led to the trauma of the victim. Let's put it that way. What was the offender or offending circumstances, for lack of a better word about that? Okay. Right. So the next thing that I want us to, in your page, let me just see which page, page 3 of your study guide. This is your critical timeline. The trauma timeline is of critical importance in trauma debriefing. You cannot do trauma debriefing without a timeline. Before, during, after. We call it a timeline, but it has got 3 major movements: a before, a during, and an after. And this happens over a period of time. This time can be 24 hours, 10 minutes, or let's say a week. Normally, the time can be different, but at the same time, let's say you're going to do trauma debriefing about a person who's caught in domestic violence. Each of the domestic violence incident is a traumatic incident on its own. So you're going to break that down, because that will be over years. When I talk about, it can be longer, the event, let's say you are a hostage and you're hostage for 48 hours or 56 days or something like that. So that will be in each of that during that time that the event took place, there will be smaller traumatic incidents as well inside of that event. Okay. I hope you can see that when we start to talk about trauma, this is not a simplistic, you have to be flexible. You have to be focused on the client and the uniqueness of the client's story. So write somewhere down for me. Each client has a unique traumatic event. Please write that down. There is not a recipe. There's techniques we're going to teach, but it's not a recipe. for each client to do it exactly the same. Okay. Trauma confuses people. Suzanne, I think if you have to think about your own traumatic incident and the days just afterwards, there was so much confusion. One doesn't know morning from day and even which date is it. Am I correct? So when the client tells you the traumatic experience, it's not going to be sequential. They are going to tell it from the place where they wish to start. Some start wherever, it does not matter. You need to just listen and then in your mind help the client to find order in the chaos of the trauma, to look at what happened before the traumatic incident and what happened after the traumatic incident. Those are different time frames and the timeline during the traumatic incident. The longer a client takes to come for trauma debriefing, the more enmeshed becomes the traumatic story, and they have difficulty separating before or even after. Things become enmeshed for them. So you need to spend some time maybe to help them untangle the enmeshment of their traumatic experiences. Okay. Let's use the example of a car accident. And the car accident where the car hits the tree will be the event, the traumatic event. The car spins out of control and hits a tree. That is the traumatic event. Before the time we were listening to, I don't know, who are people listening to these days? They were listening to some sort of funny music and happy. Afterwards, when the car has hit the tree and you are stuck in the tree and you don't know how to get out, that is after the accident. So now comes the next part where I'm trapped in the car and I have to wait for somebody to come and get me. And eventually the ambulance got up and the guy said something nasty about my dog or something like that. That is afterwards. And when I get to the hospital, that is its own after. So we have to be careful that we don't confuse the whole thing about the trauma event. For the client, it becomes one confusing experience. Just at this point, Chandra, maybe you can come in here and you have now done the practical for the students, and I just want to talk about the tools that we use during a model. Primarily, the tools are for the counselor. They're not for the client. Chandra, how do you feel about that?
Good morning, everybody. Yes, Lizette, I agree. The tools are for us as counsellors. So it is not necessarily, well, if I'm talking now about Egan, trauma, you're not giving any tools for your client except at the end when you're starting to debrief and finish with your trauma. But our tools is for us to work with our client. And it's not normally a good idea to give that tools, for example, for homework. Homework is something different. Homework is an extra tool, basically.
Can we say it's almost an extra session that the client,
yeah,
it helps them to move from what they've done and to prepare them for the next session.
Almost a bridge between the two sessions.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so in trauma, we're going to have lots of different tools, and I'm going to give you guys the tools as well. Now, at the same time, remember, in this year, you had that blind spot tool. Remember from Egan, we talk about identifying blind spots. Oopsie. Do we have to redo Egan? You said, yes, I remember my tools. Okay, because trauma forms blind spots. So you might have to integrate from other places as well if the client needs it. There's a, Sandra, what is the word that I'm thinking of? We tend to take a model and all the tools that we have sort of like formed, and we apply it exclusively in that, and that's not how clients and the counseling process work.
Ek noem dit julle speel veilig. Julle
Okay.
dink nie uit die boks uit nie.
Okay, so we need to, if you can see the client has got a blind spot, we need to help the client to, because they can't move on if they have this blind spot. Remember your tools that you had there and incorporate it in this place. So the timeline, this thing about what happened before, what happened during, and what happened afterwards, it's for you to understand the detail of the client's story. And just by the way, if there's a tool that you can use generically in all your sessions, it's this one. It will help you to plot the client's story. Is that a good way to explain it, Chandra? To sort of like understand the client's story?
Yes, in trauma, normally the client is telling a story and it is normally very dear mekaar. They're not starting at the beginning. They're starting, most of the time they're starting in the after session of this tool. So, and everything is not in place. That's why the timeline is very important. So the first thing that we as a trauma counselor need to find that part where the trauma starts.
Yeah.
Is it when the car crash? Is it when they put a tube in the throat, when they incubate the person? Is that where the trauma starts? Where did this trauma start? That's the during.
Yeah. And it's very important for us because you don't need to debrief the before. You know, I mean, that if they were on a picnic, and there's no need to debrief that, but we want the client to, why is the before important? Because this is what the trauma is. I don't know if you know about what happened in the timing of the Hamas attacks. It happened on Shabbat. So everybody was either at prayer or they were resting because it was Shabbat. And they were it was also a special event in the Jewish calendar. Don't ask me what, I can't remember. I don't know that well.
Festival of
Festival of
Sukkot.
Yeah. And it happened in this time frame. So they were all at peace, reading the Torah and so on. And the next minute, this attack happened. So we have to understand that sometimes, why did this happen while we were in prayer? Why did God allow this to happen in this time? It's also questions, but that's question that comes after, not before. Okay.
The befores are actually very important, Lizette, because the befores become triggers.
Yes, it does. And the other thing is, we want the client to understand that there was a time when they did feel safe in the same day.
Yeah, yeah.
Because for most of the day, they felt unsafe after the trauma. But there was a time, and we want to know, why is the before also important? And we want to know what is it that caused them to feel safe, so that we can engage them when they leave to do more of the stuff that makes them feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's going to look different. Suzanne, I'm going to use you again. Let's say you and your hubby watch TV on Sunday nights, for example, that make you feel safe. So now it's going to be a different event that you're going to do there. But there will be something there that you can find and still engage in, or whatever the case might be. Okay. So each one of these is important. You can keep this together for yourself at any point. And we're going to talk about how you can actually use the timeline with the client in a practical and a different ways. But this is your golden thing. So always remember, ask yourself, here's the event. The event is huge. There's so many stuff happening at the same time, but each event have got these movements. What happened before the trauma, what happened during the trauma, and what happens after the trauma. But be careful when the client comes to you, let's say 2 years later, this stuff have become enmeshed for them. It becomes one event. It becomes not the 9/11, for lack of a better description. And we need to start to help them to separate this individually. Okay. So with this in mind, we are now going to go to our breakout rooms, and we are going to look at the Bible. And we're going to have one breakout room, and we're going to look at the Bible, and you're going to look at Luke 10, verse 25 to 37. And I want you to analyze the text from the point of view of trauma. Try and see if you can use the trauma timeline to help you. Ask yourself the questions, the who's, the people, the who's, the what's. Look at terminology, victim, offender. Are they secondary offenders, and what do they look like? Can you answer the question, where was God? When you look at this text, does it say where God was? Doesn't it say? Can you find out maybe where God was in this event? Okay. It is now 9:16, so we're going to, I think we need about 45 minutes for this. And if we can then have a leg stretch, and so on. Jack, can we be back at 10:15? Then that should be a good conversation, and we should have a nice tea break and bathroom break and all of that.
Right, so that's about an hour away, 10:15. I'm going to open the breakout room for you guys, and yeah, enjoy it, and we'll see you soon again.
Hallo julle, ek hoop julle is lekker terug en het lekker gerus en ek hoop almal is terug. Kom ons dalk net 'n thumbs up gee, dat ons sien dat julle almal terug. Ek sal bly wees om julle te sien. Hallo almal. Right, so met feedback oor dit wat julle gedoen het. Vertel vir ons 'n bietjie uit die teks uit wat julle geanaliseer het, wat het julle alles raak gesien en wat het julle gesien. Kom ons begin sommer, julle kan sommer so saamgesels en dan kan julle vir my sê, wie was almal betrokke? Kom ons begin daar. Kom ons begin altyd daar. Wie was betrokke? Ek wil nie vir Chandra hê sy moet heeltyd praat nie, so ek gaan vir dalk vra om vir ons iemand op die groep te kry wat vir ons kan praat.
Susan of Vegen? One of you?
Okay, wel wie betrokke was is die Samaritaan, die lowers, die priester, die fietsdenker, die herbergier, en natuurlijk die Joodse man wat aangerand is, de victim.
Okay, so
ja.
Okay. Al die ouens wat betrokke was, en was daar nog iets of iemand wat betrokke was by die incident wat julle opgetel het wat in hierdie verhaal genoem was? So 'n peripheral gedagte.
As ek net daar kan bysê, ons het gekyk na die konteks ook van die storie, van die twee verskillende groepe wat daar was, wat soos enemies was. So dit was ook oplettend in die sin van, juist hoekom die priester en die Levite ook verbygeloop het en daar was amper soos 'n oorlog ook aan die gang gewees in daai tydperk. So we had a look at the people that were involved, and then I don't know if I'm jumping the gun, but looking at the victim, we had a look at the man who was robbed and who was actually attacked was the actual victim in that sense, so the first victim, but then the second victim being the Samaritan himself as well, because he would be mocked for helping and all that stuff because of the context of the story as well. So he was also a victim in that sense. So we spoke about that as well. And then the offenders being the thieves that initially did the deed of robbing this guy and stripping him from his clothes and all of that. But then also the secondary offenders being the priest and the Levite who saw the man as an enemy and just ignored him and walked past on the other side of the road because they saw him as an enemy, whereas the Samaritan saw him as his neighbor. That was the actual context of the story as well, because he had compassion on him.
Yeah, you saw a person in need, because that's actually what Jesus is saying. Who's your neighbor? Is the person who's in need. That is actually very powerful. Okay, so, but there was also the donkey,
Yes.
which is important.
Yes, he used his own donkey and then he obviously walked alongside the donkey. So.
But the donkey is a very important mention. They could say pack animal or anything like that, but they specifically named it a donkey. And this reminds us of Jesus, who traveled quite a bit on a donkey. It's sort of like one of those meaning, because the donkey is called a beast of burden. And there was a vehicle that carried a burden. So that's just something to keep in mind within that context. Okay. What did you guys notice as well? What happened before? What do you think happened before? If you have to have a timeline of this traumatic event, what was the before?
Ons het die reis het ons gevat as die before, die aanval self as die event, dis dit wat gebeur het, en dan die after was dan toe hy by die herberg aangekom het.
Okay, dan so eintlik as ons hierdie ding gaan uitpak, is daar pockets of events. It was when he decided this guy is a businessman going on a business journey. So he started traveling. Then there was the traumatic incident, the robbing and the, we will call it aggravated robbery today in today's language, because he was beaten. And then there was the secondary offenders who came by and did nothing. That is quite a powerful separate event, Suzanne.
Ons het daaroor gepraat oor die sekondêre trauma wat daar gebeur het, oor hulle wat hom nie gehelp het nie, weggeloop het. Dis amper soos jy sê, 2 pockets, 2 events wat trauma.
It's quite important for us to look at that, because the victim, one of his emotional experiences must have been helplessness.
Yeah, sorry, Lizette, we looked at that. We also had discussion about the trauma. What was experienced was a physical trauma, obviously, like you said, of being robbed and hurt and all that. And then we had a discussion about the emotional trauma too, because obviously, I mean, this man was feeling, like you said, hopeless, and also he lost his dignity. He lost a sense of hope after the people had walked past him, because it happened twice. So what's the thought when the third person comes around? So he lost a lot emotionally in that sense as well.
So just remember, Faggy, I just want to add, he was helpless to help himself.
Yeah.
Okay? He was helpless to help himself. And 2 able-bodied persons walked past, confirming the trauma of the helplessness in this instant. Okay, Very important. Okay, so that to me is also important. And then of course there was the intervention, the almost the first aid, where the Samaritan stepped into the trauma of the victim. And in a sense, that is your role in trauma debriefing, is that you step into the trauma. And it's such a powerful image because he used wine and oil to clean and dress his wounds, and then he loaded him on the donkey, and then he took him for further care because he had to pass him on. There was a release of responsibility to after a victim in a safe space. Something else that I just want to note, he was also spiritually traumatized, because if we look, you guys looked at context, thank you for doing the contextual research, but in Jewish culture, when you are naked, you are shameful. It is a shamed event for you to be naked. It reminds you back into the Garden of Eden, where their nakedness causes them shame and causes them to hide. So the effect of his nakedness also was a spiritual trauma event that had happened for him. There was a spiritual impact of the trauma for this victim. On the question, where was God? What did you guys discuss?
God was die hele tyd daar. Hy was in beheer. Hy was in beheer van die hele situasie. Hy het mense, 4 mense gestuur oor die Samaritaanse pad. Ja, God was daar.
That's actually amazing. That's actually amazing to realize that, because here we have this helpless, spiritually traumatized victim. But God steps into his story as well by sending more than one. If the first person doesn't work, he sends a second one, and then he sends a third one, and so on and so forth. So there's this intentional help that God gives to this person in this situation.
So can I play devil's advocate? Sorry, I don't want to play that role. It's a bit challenging. But okay, so why did he get beat up? Where was God? Why didn't he protect him? If God was there and he was in control, why did the guy get hurt?
Because God doesn't control our choices that we make.
Okay, so this is very important, because this can make or break a person's experience of where was God. So we're saying God does protect. We trust that he's there. But so have any of you heard of the concept of theodicy? So that's the big question: where is God, and why does he allow suffering? And we need to understand that God is all powerful, he's all loving, caring, but he's also just and righteous and fair. And he wants a relationship with us in the purest form possible. So he will not impose himself into our life and our business as uninvited. So the will of man is critical when we are dealing with this. Many people will say that man does not have a will. It's all God that does everything. But clearly in this case, we can see God did not intervene in the choices of the robbers. He did not intervene in the choices of the priest and the Levite. Although, as you rightly said, he sent the priest and the Levite, his representatives, to help the person, and they chose to not do it. And the last person that he sent was this Samaritan. Now, obviously, Jesus is using this parable to prove a point, but in that we can see God's heart, that he will bring forth the answer as he chooses to. Again, we are challenged with this topic, but you can do a bit of research on theodicy. It's quite interesting to begin to understand where God's will is when suffering happens.
You have got that first year book from Clancy that you guys have read during your first year. That's actually this answer, where is God when it hurts, that helps you in this concept. And I think it's important to keep that book close by. Craig Rochelle has also written about this concept. And he's, I can't remember what his book is called, but you can go online and just double check, because he's also written about this concept. And it's a wonderful book, a very practical book about answering this concept. The thing is, we have to hold the space for the client to know that God is with them even in this very difficult, traumatic event. But we also live within the reality of a broken world where sin is rife. It's all around us. This morning we are a victim of crime. Just told Jack they stole or attempted to steal some sort of wire. We've got a fiber, and they broke in and cut the fiber. I don't know, whatever. So we are battling with internet. So we all are, and I mean, that is not cool for me. It's giving me a huge amount of stress and so on. So the question is, do we believe that God will have a better outcome for us in spite of the trauma that we have gone through? And I think that is the thing. And God was there. God sent help. God was busy with each of the healing processes. So always ask yourself for your own mind. Keep this concept that Jack just spoke about. You need to make it clear what is your belief system regarding this. Do we believe that only good things are going to happen to us while we're living on this earth? Because if we do, the client's belief system will also be challenged by the traumatic event. But I go to church twice on a Sunday, I do all of these things. Why did I lose my job, or had a car accident, or the house was flooded, or whatever the case might be? The belief system will also be influenced by the traumatic event. So we have to hold that space for them to ask the question and to express it, and to be able, and not, you mustn't correct them, just allow them to express it at that point, if they do have that. Okay. So let's quickly look at what our model is going to look like, and then we're going to spend the rest of the day, the rest of the 2 days, working through this model. I'm going to spend a bit of time on the introduction phase. Chandra, Jack, if there's things you want to add at the introduction phase, I think that's very important, because it's one of the we are so excited to get to all the other stuff that we forget the importance of setting the scene. James Clear always says you need to define the starting line clearly, otherwise you're going to get lost as to where you're going to go. So it works like this. It is a model that attempts to break down the experience of the client into the following movements. It's not phases as such as it is movements. And again, it revolves around the timeline before, during, and after. It's a constant point. We must not move away from that. So the first, the facts is about the events that has happened. It's all the stuff that has happened, events that you're going to attempt when you're in conversation with your client later to put into a sequential way. First, we just want to get all the facts about it. The next step we're going to go to is the cognitive phase, is how did the client think? What was their thoughts about this concept? Step 3 is what most people want to skip because we have a misconception, Jack, and that is that we need to run into the emotions immediately. And most of our clients have got limited emotive vocabulary. So they haven't got the words to express what they're feeling anyway. And we want to rush to the emotions because we think if we have dealt with the emotions, we are going to be able to help them to feel better. But we actually need to find a way for them to think differently about what has happened to them. So the third phase is we're going to explore the thought processes, and you're going to find some similarity as with Eden to look at the negative thought processes that was captured in that traumatic event. Then from there we're going to explore the emotional experiences of the client. From there we're going to look at the stress reaction phase. This victim empowerment model only look at the stress reaction phase in this first movement of this model. Other models starts from the stress reaction phase and then try to normalize the stress reaction phase to then get to facts and so on. But the research have proven the following, that the client will sit in front of you in the stress reaction phase. What you saw about the dad of Emily, he was in his stress reaction phase. And by helping you to debrief them with facts, thoughts, and emotions, allows them to recognize what was their stress reaction. Then up until point 5, is all about the trauma. It's all about the traumatic experience of the client. So draw a line with red in your books between stress reaction phase and stress management. Because this is what Chandra mentioned, is we want to leave our client feeling empowered. So we're going to help them form positive coping techniques. Because the reality is that trauma has affected you in many different ways. So this traumatic event, you might recall it in unexpected times and places. So you need to be able to manage your stress reaction to this. And this is what we do in phase 6. So that is the healing phase. That is the phase where we actually are about to send them out. And then we get to the conclusion phase, which is just as important as the first phase. Because and I think from my experience this year with the practical, except with the level 2s, people have forgotten in the conclusion phase to revisit what was happening for the client during the different phases of the different models. They just want to close off and send everybody home. The conclusion phase is so important because that's how you're going to send the client back into the world. It's where you look, are there any unfinished business? What do we need to finish, or maybe refer for more counseling? or whatever the case might be in the conclusion phase. Let's revisit what was done so that the client can see how far they have come. Remember, they're experiencing counseling from the inside out. They're experiencing the healing, the pain, the working. You are experiencing from the outside in. You see how they are progressing, but they might not feel they are progressing. So it's important that by the conclusion phase, you empower your client by telling them how far they have come, what they have achieved, and how they have achieved it. We must always leave our client feeling that they are taking back, I don't want to say control of their life, that might be the wrong word. Chandra, maybe you can help with a better phrase. Taking back management of their life and their lifestyle and the choices that they make. Right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at each of these individual components. We're going to look at how to approach them, and I want you guys to please make use of the chat, or even just switch on your microphone and ask a question and talk with me. We have the privilege of being a small group, so we have the time available to discuss this. I think it's quite important. Okay, so let's go on, and you will see that the vehicle we're going to use is called a structured conversation. So we have a structured conversation, not in Afrikaans is die woord ligraak, a hodgepodge of conversation techniques. We follow a structured conversation. You should recognize this from your level 2 work, and you should recognize it from your Egan experience, because your reports were in a similar sections. What did you prepare? What did you do in the meeting phase? What did you contract to talk about? And so on. So you will see that I have given you the VEM is the Victim Empowerment Model. I want you to remember this model, because there are other models out there as well that people use, but this is the one that has been most, I want to say, scientifically sound. So in the victim empowerment, what are you going to do before the meeting? So let us talk here. What do you do before you see your client? Now, use your experiences from Egan and think about trauma. What will you do before the meeting? What will you prepare? Suzanne, can I put you in the hot seat? What will you do to prepare yourself?
Well, first of all, I will make sure that the room that the client is going into is not te mekaar. Especially vir allemaal met hulle trauma ervaar het, sodat dit georden is. Maak dit sin?
Yes,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Chandra, what do you think about your space must be ordered?
En saam met Susan, ons moet vir ons kliënte 'n safe space create, omdat hulle juis voel hulle is onveilig.
Okay. Ursula, what would you do in the preparation phase? What would you do as a preparation?
I think just like Suzanne and Chandra mentioned, create a safe environment, a space that is ordered, welcoming, comforting, and that will facilitate conversation. No distractions. Make sure you have the necessary things like your tissues, your forms, whatever you need, ready to get the process flowing. Yeah, started.
Okay, so let's talk what Ursula just told us. This is important. You have to prepare your therapeutic documents. Make sure that they are there and accessible. You mustn't go foraging into a drawer or into, I don't know, where else. Go and try and find where is your therapeutic document. Make sure that they are there and they are available. Things like tissues are important. Chandra gave us a nice list in the Egan. We discussed it. What do you need to do before your meeting? Make sure that you have that available. Chandra, Jack, what do you think? Do we serve coffee during trauma debriefing?
No,
Rather not caffeine.
Yeah.
you can give them water because in a traumatic event they are going to talk a lot, so the mouth will become dry. But that's basically it. Because they need to talk. They cannot then they've got the coffee and the coffee is cold and no.
And you have to run around to go get more sugar or something like that. Okay. Linda, wat dink jy?
Ek dink nou van 'n counselor se kant af emosioneel moet ek ook voorbereid wees.
Ja.
Kalm. As die atmosfeer reg is en ek hoef nie rond te hardloop nie, kan ek fokus op die kliënt en spasie gee en luister, soos jy nou baie keer al gesê het.
Ja, en ons gaan nog weer baie sê. Okay, so let us quickly look at this. I want to comment on Linda now, but let's just finish our conversation. Coffee and tea is things we are not going to give our clients especially in debriefing. Make sure that you've got, I like bottles of water. It's just easier for me, or if you prefer water in a glass that they can pour for themselves, have it there. I think one of the things I have learned in counseling is not to put funny stuff in the water like berries and lemons and things like that, because not everybody likes it. Then you have the client and he's going, and he doesn't want it in his mouth or whatever. So,
I was just wondering, it's many times the case that it's not the client in a trauma situation that comes to you, but many times you that goes to a client in terms of something that happened. I'm just thinking about, being called out to a scene or being called out to, say, a business that has been robbed or hijacked. So many times they don't come to you. You actually go to individuals or groups.
Okay, so Jack, I want to come back to you as well. So let's talk about it. Have water available, have tissues available, and have a rubbish bag available, or a rubbish bin, so the clients don't sit and worry what they do with the tissues. Okay, so have that in their space. Just one thing I want to add to this when we welcome a client in trauma. Please don't go and hug them and be loud and all of that. Linda, this is coming to your own preparation as a person to be yourself, but be calm and I want to say collected. You know that most of the time they're coming for trauma. So you must, from the meeting at the door, embody that almost professionalism, that they will feel comfortable with you talking about the traumatic event. You also have to prepare, knowing you're going to deal with information and traumatic stories. Our clip this morning showed our different reactions we have about a father's pain. What are you going to do with your emotions? Mentally prepare for that as well. Jack, on your comment about we might not be doing it in our own space. That's very true. You might, let's say there was a bank robbery, you might have to go and do group debriefing, and you will make use of their staff room. So in your preparation phase, you're going to have to visit the staff room to see what it looks like. Don't arrive there and you don't know what's going on and where people are going to go, and try to get a name list of everybody and so on from the person who organizes this. So that when you get there, you know what it is. The one thing I will say, Jack, and thank you for that comment, you don't debrief a client at the scene of the trauma. There must be some distance between that effect. So I think that's quite important.
That's important, Lizette. Many times people will, or counselors will be called to a scene, but you must remember that's not necessarily debriefing. That is more support. So a debriefing is a very specific situation which is controlled, and it usually
Yes.
happens a day or two after.
Okay. When you are going to do group debriefings, let's say at a business and so on, you need somebody with you. You've got, let's say, 10 people. Everybody talks at the same time. Oh boy, it's getting confusing. You can't watch 10 people or even 2 or 3 people at the same time and make sure that because this person had a different experience than this person. So body language and things like that is very, very important that you have to initiate in there. Right, so carefully plan. This is what I'm trying to say. Your meeting. What are you going to do in the meeting? Your tools, pens, whatever you're going to need, the practical stuff. We forget about that practical stuff. What do you guys think if you're coming for trauma debriefing to have soft music in the background? What is your thoughts on that one?
Lizzie,
Ja,
sorry, ek het nie my gesag nie, want ek weet nou nie wat aangaan daar nie.
It's okay, it's okay.
Weet jy, ek dink nie mens moet versigtig wees daarmee, want elkeen het 'n ander taste aan musiek. En wat vir die een miskien rustig is, miskien herinner dit die persoon spesifiek aan die trauma event. Jy weet, mens weet nooit aan deur so 'n persoon se emosies gaan nie, of sy gedagtes. Ek wil net gou ietsie aansluit by daai wat jy moet voorberei. Dalk het iemand dit al gesê, want ek het gemis. Weet jy, die stilte buite is nogal belangrik. Ek het gesien met my ander vrou wat ek ook sessies gehad het. Miskien nie soos honde wat baie blaf. Mense gaan deur al hierdie trauma en dit kan ook negatiewe dinge veroorsaak en natuurlik selfoon en so aan. Maar anyway, so wat ek eintlik wil sê is die musiek moet mens miskien maar versigtig wees. En die ander rede is dan dis amper 'n trek ook. Musiek trek 'n bietjie af wat jy dan wil oorbring. Want hulle kom ons na jou toe, so hulle wil meer jou stem hoor as wat hulle sal luister na die musiek, weet. Almal se konsentrasie is ook nie goed nie. So dis maar wat ek dink.
Ek dink dis nie, daar's nie 'n reg of verkeerd nie, Bets. Daar's regtig nie 'n reg of verkeerd nie. Chandra, in jou spreekkamer gebruik jy musiek?
Ja, ek gebruik glad nie musiek in my spreekkamer nie. Dit trek die kliënt se aandag af en myne.
Okay. Wie was al in 'n plek waar hulle wel musiek gehad het en kan julle dalk Jack?
Ja, ek het as jy gaan en dis deel van dit wat jy verwag, dan is dit fyn. Maar jy weet, ek was ook al by 'n sielkundige gewees en ja, dit was nie sterend nie, maar dit kon ook net sowel nie daar gewees het nie. Dit was so half ekstra. Dit het geen doel gedien nie. As dit 'n doel dien, dan is dit 'n ander saak. Maar ja, ek sou dit ook nie regtig. Dis net nog 'n ding wat jou aftrek en nog 'n ding wat jy moet beheer, so dit is nie nodig nie.
Okay. Ek hou van wat julle sê. Ek wil julle begin dink oor dit. Jy weet, so dat 'n ou jou dis maklik om te sê ons moet 'n veilige spasie hê, maar hoe lyk 'n veilige spasie fisies? Dis nie so eenvoudig nie. Okay. So kom ons gesels 'n bietjie dan oor die voorbereiding en hoe gaan ons dit alles doen met die introduction phase? Ons het 'n bietjie gesê oor voorbereiding en al die klas van goeders. So in your introduction phase, your first movement of the model, you're going to contract what you're going to talk about, and you're going to orientate the client to the process. Okay, so we're going to contract what we're going to talk about, and we're going to orientate the client to the process of what is happening. Those two things is of critical importance in any model that you're going to use. It keeps you on track into the phase of the model that you are. Let's say it's Egan and you need to do brainstorming. Then you're going to say, you know what? We're not going to do Egan 2B. That client doesn't know what that means. Even Egan phase 2B or 2A or 2D, that they don't know. They don't need to know. We're going to say, you know what? Today we're going to sort of like, is it okay with you if we're going to look at what would your life look like without the problem? And how we're going to do this, we are just going to do some brainstorming or whatever the case might be. So you're going to, from the beginning, take control of the conversation. From the beginning, take control of the conversation. I think that's quite important. So, what do you need to do in this phase? We are on your page 6 of your study guide. What do you need to do in the introduction phase? Okay. You need to explain, you need to say hello. So you need to greet them. And I'm not going to go back. We have done this in Eden. How are you going to greet them? What are the words you're going to use? And so on. Then, as you enter your counseling space, explain to them, because this is trauma. They're coming to you for trauma debriefing, like Jack said. There's a specific reason why they're here. Tell them what do you want to do, and how will you explain in your own words the aim of trauma debriefing. You need to explain that to them. You need to also help them to participate within this conversation, and you need to set boundaries. We cannot do effective counseling if there is not boundaries. Boundaries respects the client's right to tell you what they want to tell you. You don't force a client, especially in trauma. Okay, so a basic definition, but you need to sort of form your own one, is you can explain to them that you are going to want to lessen what they experienced. You explain to them what they're going to expect. The way I normally do this, we're just going to talk. It's just going to be a conversation. You need to talk about this because this will help your recovery. I spoke to somebody yesterday who explained to me that she needs to discuss this with her mother, but she can't discuss this with her mother because her mother will not understand this, and she's experiencing trauma of many years of rejection, and she just knows it's going to be helpless. So I said to her, but why are you fixated to tell your mom? Because this is the thing of what how her mom rejects her. That's all she wants to tell her mom. You do this and this. She actually wants to tell her mother what your mother is doing wrong. So my question is, does that going to help you to feel better about yourself when you have a blaming conversation? We need to help the client to normalize their stress response. This is important because otherwise they're going to keep staying in this fight or flight mode. And then the space that you guys talk about for verbalization. So they must be able to hear you, and you must be able to listen to them. I think that is what's going to be important. You need to engage the client in the process of trauma debriefing. They need to talk to you. So you need to, what are the ways we're going to ask the client to talk to you? We can think of any. How will you get the client to start the process? Who wants to come up with an idea? There's not right or wrong ideas. Let's just talk about it. How will you motivate the client to participate in the conversation?
By asking questions.
What type of question would you ask? A good point, but what would you ask?
Why, what, when?
Okay. Is that going to be your first question? So I'm just trying to, it's not wrong to ask a question, but you want to motivate the client to participate. So we don't want them to feel like they are being persecuted in a court either. So,
would you like to tell me what happened? Or would you like to share your story with me or something along those lines?
Yeah, somebody else? Anybody? You guys are going to have to do it, so you're going to have to come up with how are you going to do it, Faggy?
I've just got a question regarding this being with trauma debriefing. It's a lot different than another model. So would you start off with the icebreaker? How would you approach icebreakers in a situation when you're dealing with trauma?
I don't think we'll do an icebreaker.
I mean something like this. You're not going to start on a different note like that.
No, you're gonna keep focus on the trauma, Linda.
Kan 'n mens vra wat hulle op die oomblik nou ervaar of is dit te gou?
Ek dink dis te gou. Ons onthou ons het die model in die agtergrond, nê? Nee.
Ja.
Ons het die model in die agtergrond.
Okay.
Ons moet hulle motiveer om te gesels.
Ja. Kan julle nie net of die persoon net aanmoedig om net eenvoudige storie te begin vertel?
Ek hou van daai aanslag.
Kan jy dat dit eerder van daai persoon afkom as wat, want hulle is mos nou gespanne en so, hulle hou mos nou daarvan om die storie. Soos 'n trust, amper soos 'n trust. Dat jy luister.
Ja, Jack, wil jy iets gesê het?
Ek dink as die persoon na jou toe kom en dit is as gevolg van 'n traumatiese gebeurtenis, eerstens weet hulle kom om daaroor te praat. En ek dink daar's 'n verwagting dat hulle tot 'n mate beter gaan voel nadat hulle met jou gepraat het. So die idee dat hulle gaan praat, glo ek, is vars in hulle geheue. Dis die rede hoekom hulle kom. Maar om vir hulle 'n veilige, gemaklike, konfidensiële spasie te skep waar hulle werklik oor 'n baie ernstige situasie kan praat, is nou meer as ooit belangrik. So ek dink die gevoel van net dat 'n persoon veilig is, dat daar struktuur is, want soos jy al baie gesê het, dis chaoties, dit is jou hele lewe is in 'n oogwink verander. Jy het dalk jou kind verloor, soos die klip wat ons gesien het. Verstaan, ons praat hier so van regtig horrible goed wat gebeur het met mense. So hulle het 'n veilige plek nodig. En ek dink dit is die belangrikste. Ek dink mense kan nou maar al die triks in die boek gebruik om iemand te laat praat in so 'n situasie, maar as hulle nie veilig voel en hulle voel nie welkom en tuis en gemaklik nie, dan gaan jy baie sukkel.
Chandra, van jou kant af enige raad vir ons?
Trauma is 'n baie moeilike ding want baie mense wil nie praat oor trauma nie. Die rede daarvoor is hulle gaan terug in die seer in en hulle wil nie terug gaan in die seer in nie, want dit gaan al die emosies uitbring. Dis 'n baie moeilike ding. So hulle sal 'n storie baie keer begin enige plek, maar hulle kom nie op die punt om vir jou eintlik te vertel waar die probleem lê en wat gebeur het nie. En dit is maar waar jy baie sagkens met jou kliënt baie saggies gaan hanteer. As jy 'n kliënt het wat baie emosioneel is, kan dit baie uitputtend wees, maar jy moet vir haar die spasie gee om dan te huil. As sy baie vinnig praat, gaan jy 10 met haar vinnig terugpraat. As sy baie stadig praat, gaan jy met haar baie rustiger wees. Om heeltemal die atmosfeer, soos wat Jack nou gesê, die atmosfeer te skep van deel jou storie met my. Wat gaan in jou hart aan? Wat gaan in jou kop aan? Want party het nog glad nie eers daaroor gepraat nie. Jy's dalk die eerste persoon wat hierdie storie gaan hoor. Of sy gaan haarself hoor vir die eerste keer.
Ek het altyd my kliënte gesê, please choose the chair that you want to sit in. You have 2 chairs and they can choose a chair. Immediately, they have power of choice. So that's just something that makes them feel less helpless. Psychologically, it's a good thing that they start with a choice. Chandra?
Ja. Gewoonlik in greeting phase is maar net, thank you for coming. I know it's very difficult for you to be here. I'm glad you're here to share your story with me. Dadelik hulle gemaklik voel, waar is die toilet, daar soos tissues, dadelik weet, okay, hier is dit. Ek vra nie vir trauma kliënte vir water nie, ek gee vir hulle water, ek sit dit langs hulle neer, en ek maak dit kalm en rustig, maak seker hulle voel, iemand gaan hulle nie hoor nie, so dis maar meeste van die tyd toe vertrek, soos ons altyd maar doen. As jy jou huis gebruik vir 'n trauma en jy het meer oop vertrekke, gaan jy dalk counselling doen in meer oop vertrekke, is dit fyn, maar trauma gaan bietjie meer 'n geïsoleerde plek wees om bietjie meer veilig te voel. Jy kan vir hulle ook kussings neersit. Party van hulle gaan op die vloer sit, party van hulle gaan 'n kussing vat en op hulle skoot sit. So dit hang af hoe hulle gaan veilig voel in die situasie. Moes nog nie by grense gekom nie, maar ek kan byvoorbeeld nie 'n man help wie se vrou nou net dood is nie. Hy gaan aanklank by my vind en hy gaan rus en of veiligheid by my vind en ek is nie daar om vir hom die veiligheid te gee.
Please take note what Chandra is saying, eh? This is important for you because you're busy with the ministry as well. So that is important. Okay. And then
can I just ask a question? I just want to clarify. Before Chandra spoke now, previously, was she saying that when you speak back to the client, you mirror their tone or their manner of? Okay, I got that right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you mirror it, Ursula. But if you're going to note, let's say they're starting to speak quicker and quicker, and you know they're approaching hysteria. You know you speak slower. Okay, that's what we're talking about. You have to listen with every fiber of your being. You have to, this is exhausting work. This is really exhausting. So you try in the beginning, you mirror, but if let's say they're interested and that you feel like they're going to get into hysteria, you slow down and they will receive and your voice, your tone is, the tone will go to hysteria for the client. Your tone is comforting, quiet. They must almost stop and say, what did you say now? That is what we call a break, emotional break technique, for instance. Okay, good question.
Thank you.
All right. Right, important, you need to stay in the moment. Right. To create that safe space, don't run ahead. If the client doesn't talk about all the other people that was involved, you don't talk about the other people involved. Don't run in front of the client. We're going to get there initially. Show them acceptance by not correcting them. If a client bangs their fist or they throw something down or they use a swear word or they tell you that God is horrible, you don't correct them. You allow them to express what they are feeling. For most of the time, because we encourage you are Christian counselors, so you work with Christians who are going through trauma. That will mostly be your purview, the people that you work with. So they will not hate God. So you don't have to, and whatever happens in the beginning, because a client might come in and say, I know you're a Christian, just don't talk to me about God because look what happened to me in this instant. And you listen to what they are saying and you continue working as the normal. Okay. don't correct them, don't challenge them, not right now. They cannot be challenged at this moment. I also tell them we are just going to talk. I tell them what we're going to do. We're going to talk, and I normally say to them, I'm going to be quiet, but I'm blonde. I might have to ask you a question when I don't understand what you are saying. So that disarms, takes a little bit of tension out, and it's still in the initial stages. So I will allow them, and then they will normally ask me this question. Chandra, you might also have it, and you too, Jack. Where do you want me to begin? I allow them to begin wherever I normally say, what's the first thing that you want to tell me? Or just begin where you want to. And I allow them to just talk about it. Okay, we're getting to our boundaries now. Therapeutic relationships are close relationships between at least two people, in which one of them is the therapist or the counselor or whatever you wish to call yourself, and the other is the client. The counselor is the giver of empathy and comfort, and the client is needy. This is exactly what Chandra now explained to you. Each client comes to you from a place of need. We have to have the wisdom to have boundaries in place of what things we are going to work with and what we are not going to work with. So you need to then refer, because we can't further traumatize our client. You need to look at your own judgments, your own critical belief systems that we have. People live totally different to you, and they've got totally different value systems. Do not be aware of the totally different value systems. I love my animals, but I found that they are disruptive normally in a counseling session, so I don't allow my animals in a counseling session. Unless it's a specific, I know you're going to tell me, but what about the therapy animals? They normally visit, and it's not in trauma debriefing. Okay, so know what your space is, know what you're going to do, and know what's going to happen in that space. You need to have a professional relationship. I hate using that word, but I need to use that word. That creates distance. The client's not your friend. The client is a person in need that you need to help. If we look at Jesus and the way he encountered the people he healed versus the relationship he had with his disciples, it's completely different. Some people he saw once only, and he was abrupt and almost discourteous. What do you want me to do? Go take your bed and walk, man. What is your problem? But with Peter, he has conversations. With John, he has conversations. And be aware of your relationship dynamics, your professional dynamics within the counseling room. Okay. So we need to create a safe space. And here's your space, and here's the client's space. And trauma is going to form a bonding process between you and your client. And that is the shared space of trauma. Suzanne, maybe one of your, maybe God's going to direct you to have a ministry of women who have lost husbands, and that's going to be your calling in your ministry, because you speak from first-hand experience. So your trauma and the client's trauma is going to form that shared space. Even if it's not maybe with women widows, maybe it's with other people, but you have a trauma forms that shared space, and that shared space is holy ground. The question that you have to ask yourself is, what are you going to allow in that shared space, in that holy ground, that place where hearts are going to meet? You can only get to that shared space when you have healthy client counselor boundaries. And that is where healing takes place, when there's a shared space that's safe, but you know what your role is and the client knows what's their role. They don't dictate to you. You are the direction giver in the conversation. They direct the pace, how fast the process is going to happen because of their emotional experiences, but you give the direction. So you give the direction, they give the pace of the sessions. Okay. You need to, part of the boundaries is you need to limit your own self-disclosure. I want to say this again, it's not about you. It's about the client. Limit your self-disclosure. Establish rules in the conversational space. Imagine for yourself, what are you comfortable with? When I was one year, when I was in the Cape, and Grina and I went to a church service, it was before COVID, that long ago. And the first thing these strangers do is they hug you. I don't want to get hugged by funny, strange people. Give me my handshake, that's fine. Hug me if I'm part of your congregation, yes. But I don't want to get hugged by 10,000 people. I don't like that. It's not for me. Welcome us, but don't immediately assume that I want to get hugged when I enter a door of a church. What do you feel safe with? And remember that of your client. We do not engage in romantic relationships with your client. Write this down. Be careful of this. It happens every day. Therapists and clients, the intimacy of the emotional intimacy leads to physical intimacy. Be vigilant. Be vigilant. If possible, avoid social media interactions with your client. If a client likes you on your social media platform, allow that. Don't not engage them, but keep your professional distance. Maybe at this point, what are you putting on social media as well? Because that's also important. Be careful when it comes to touch. Be careful when it comes to touch. Don't invade their space, and so be careful. Be topic specific. Make sure that we stay on topic and we don't get deviated. Choose how you're going to use your language. How are you going to speak to the client? We don't speak from a place that we are higher than them. We speak as though we are experiencing with them, but at the same time, we keep our language professional, without frillies and all flowery and all sorts of funny things. Openness will grow as you go into the session, and be careful, be very careful regarding religious practices and religious answers. Be very careful about that. Trauma specifically, I must be so careful what I say now. The impact of trauma is not lessened by doing certain prayer practices. Prayer is conversation with God, in which healing does take place. We all have got witnessing stories of God's redemption in our lives. But trauma debriefing is not the same as prayer. What is the word that they use these days for prayer? Therapy or whatever they use. It's not the same thing. Be very careful about that. We have a student who told me she has gone for all of these different religious practices and she's still suffering with the nightmare of the trauma. In fact, the prayer practice have opened up unfinished business regarding her trauma. And she's struggling with that. So be careful. Don't be naive. May I use that word? Don't be naive when it comes to your client. Jack, did you want to add to that? When it comes to religious practices, or Chandra?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we always need to take into account. I think the end goal is really to not cause more harm than the person has already experienced, but to provide a safe space for them.
Please note, I'm not saying that prayer does not work. It's not what I said at all. Don't mishear me. Chandra, did you want to make a comment on that? Or?
In trauma counseling, I am not opening my trauma with prayer because I do not know where the client is in relationship with God. Most of the time, they are angry with God. So if I'm going to start with prayer, I'm going to move out of the safe place that I'm trying to create.
Yes. So that brings us back to music and gospel music and things like that we have and so on. So it brings us back to that question. Okay. And be careful of giving pious answers regarding the sovereignty of God. We're not there for a theological debate. So be aware of that. It will derail where you want to be. Okay. I think that's very important. Okay. So I think that is just what I wanted to talk about there, and how important it is to get to that point that we are going to get to. Jack, if we can have a short, what I'm going to do, I think, we're going to have a breakout room now, and I want, with what we have learned, talk about how we will prepare to listen to somebody's traumatic stories. We want to prepare, just the preparation phase. How will I prepare myself for the counseling process to meet a client for the first time? How will you introduce yourself? What are the boundaries? That number 3 is one of the most critical questions I can ask you. What are the boundaries you're going to set? And how are you going to explain to the client what is the aim of trauma debriefing? Okay. So I'm going to let us have a, let's say 30 minutes for this conversation, and then it's lunch. Can we be back at 12:30? It should be fine then. We don't have an hour-long lunch. It's slightly shorter. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's perfect. So I'm gonna send us into the breakout room. You will have the opportunity to have a session regarding what Lizette has shared, and then we will be back here at 12:30 after your lunch. Okay, I'm gonna open the rooms for you. Enjoy.